Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Okay, folks, we're having a little trouble with the server again. It's not letting me pick up anybody or pick up the server with anybody on the line for some reason. So we are getting it back. I believe there we go, is the lessons are back, and I didn't start quick enough. You're live.
Okay. Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com or freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And today we have a very special guest, Raymond-Szymanski. I think I pronounced it right. Yay. Award-winning author and researcher Raymond-Szymanski is currently the undisputed expert on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and its heralded connection to extraterrestrials. In his recently published book, 50 Shades of Grey, Evidence of Extraterrestrial Visitation to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and Beyond, Shimansky reveals the unprecedented photographic evidence he has personally produced and factual information he has developed that supports long-held rumors of Wright-Patterson's alien involvement. As a 40-year employee of the fabled Air Force Base, Raymond has unique first-person access to locations and individuals with information that eludes other accomplished researchers regardless of their pedigree. Raymond holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical and Electronics Engineering from the University of Detroit from 1975. In 1983, he completed his graduate studies in computer engineering at Wright State University. He holds 6 professional software certifications and has hundreds of hours of additional professional education. From 83 to 93, he led the ADA Joint Program Office's evaluation and validation team sponsored by the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Late in his career, he was competitively selected by the Wright-Patterson Base commander to serve 2 years as the first director of the installation civilian wellness program, impacting the lives of all 12,000 base civilian employees. Raymond is a certified personal trainer through the prestigious Cooper Institute, and he has run 13 marathons, including the 2010 and 2015 Boston marathons. He has retired in 2011 as a senior engineer scientist for the Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson, and he has been researching the UFO topic for decades. And about his book. Although his book has only been out for a few months, Raymond has already made guest appearances on many shows. And he won the Nonfiction Bestseller Award at the Dayton Book Expo. And he's been presenting at MUFON, and he has bookings all the way through to the beginning of 2017. So he's taken off. So, Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say before we bring on Raymond?
Well, Raymond, I guess the one thing that comes up to me is, are you being able to disclose now, as part of soft disclosure, having a person who, with your information come out? Seems like there's people high up that want that to happen. I wish you'd comment on that.
So welcome to our show, Raymond.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad that you could have me. We're
very happy to have you. We met at one of the events this year. I forget which one it was. I had your card. You were at a conference earlier this year, somewhere in.
Yeah, we met a contact
late last year.
We met a contact this year. And we were,
yes.
We met outside the sanctuary. We were just kind of hanging around. I think I was trading books with Rosemary Guiley at the time.
Very good. You have a better memory than I do. So this isn't a complete background biography of yourself. I'd like you to tell our listeners what you want them to know about yourself and tell them about your book and anything else you want our listeners to know. We're all ears.
Okay. Well, and then we'll get back to Dr. Sasha's question about whether I'm part of a self-disclosure, because I think that's an interesting topic.
Yes.
Excellent.
So why don't we start briefly with an overview of my work history, and we'll just do it kind of in a nutshell format so we won't bore the listeners. But it was a dreary January day in 1973. I was a cooperative education student, and I was one of 4 that were sent to do a 4-month stint at Wright-Patterson, and we would alternate, go there for 4 months, come back, go to school, and do that for up to 3 years. So it was a dreary day. It was January. I was away from home for the first time. I didn't really know what to expect, but everybody was welcoming. And the first 3 years there, we basically spent, because I was assigned to the laboratory, we spend it as a bench scientist, and we learn our ways around the laboratory. We meet the personnel there. We find out to a limited degree what's going on, and we learn the projects that are available and maybe something we'll come back to once we graduate. So after the first 3 years, I probably spent the next 20 as a program manager, again, working for Air Force Research Laboratory. Eventually, you graduate from that and you become a staffer at headquarters. So the colonel that was running Air Force Research Labs at the time had me come up, and I was a subject matter expert for a couple of years. Then you kind of get promoted and you become a representative between the laboratory and an outside Air Force command, and you find out what their requirements are, and you see if somebody in the laboratory can address those warfighter needs. And then, you're kind of peeking out on your career, and selective opportunities come up. Because I was a certified personal trainer through the Cooper Institute, and I had a natural interest in athletics, and I was running marathons at the time, they had a need for an internal person who would try to get others in the organization interested in taking better care of themselves. And they were starting to formalize this within the Air Force, and especially Air Force Research Labs. So I was chosen as the wellness leader for Air Force Research Laboratory, where I served for 3 years. And then I was selected by the base commander at the time, General Bradley Spacey, to become the wellness director for all of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my career in a nutshell.
So tell us more about what Sasha was asking about. What
was going on at Wright-Patterson, and how long has it been hidden, and did Roosevelt and Truman make sacred deals in Eisenhower with the ETs? What's up, man?
Hey, this is wonderful. It was my first week at Wright-Patterson, and I was assigned to a gentleman whose name I refer to in my book as Corvette Al. And it's because he had a weathered, stress-cracked, and Corvettes were fiberglass bodies that he picked up off a used car lot. But he was so proud of that. And the guy was going to go somewhere, and he eventually became a member of the Senior Executive Service. Now, the Senior Executive Service is the highest rank you can obtain as a civilian within the Department of Defense. You can become the equivalent of a 5-star general as a member of the Senior Executive Service. Well, at the time he was a GS-11, and he said, "Hey, let's go across the hangar," because there were 2 buildings, and in between the buildings was this hangar that there were some experiments going on, but pretty much empty. He said, "Let's go to the Greasy Spoon, and we're going to have a chat." And we got into the hangar, and there's nobody but 2 of us. And he says, "Have you heard about our aliens?"
Ooh.
This is January of 1973. So, I'm away from home for the first time, and I'm trying to mind my P's and Q's because this is my first really professional assignment. I just got finished with sophomore year in college, so you want to make a good impression. So I'm like, oh, where's he going with this? And we're alone in this big hangar. Someday I'll send you folks a photo of it. It's now the Wright Field Fitness Center, in fact, filled with equipment.
Oh,
so
love to see it.
Yeah, so I will do that. And one time, so it's now empty. And I said, "Well, what aliens?" He said, "Well, the aliens in the tunnel." I said, "We have aliens? We have tunnels?" He says, he says, "Well, yes." And no, we're walking to this other half of the building on the other side of the hangar to get a Snickers bar or something. And I said, "Well, can we go see these aliens in the tunnels?" He said, "No, it's a secret." Well, I started to question myself, like, okay, what's your definition of secret? And I said, "Well, if it's so secret, how do you know about it?" He said, "Well, everyone knows about it." Well, how's that possible? He said, "Oh, yeah." And so, I had mentioned the word secret like 2 or 3 times. And, at that point, I didn't have a security clearance. That process hadn't started. I knew nothing about classified information. I was literally off the turnip truck as far as Wright-Patterson was concerned. So apparently the 3rd time I mentioned the word secret, it made him uncomfortable. And he said, "Well, let's get our candy and go back." So when I do a public presentation, I bring a copy of a letter that I sent to Corvette Al. I found his address 40 years after I'd last talked to him. He's retired. I sent him a letter saying, "Here is a copy of the text that I'm going to retell this seminal story of you telling me about aliens in the tunnels, and I want you to agree or disagree or edit it." And he only changed a couple of words in the entire dialogue, which of course is included in the book, in the foreword of the book. So
cool.
So he basically validated everything I'd written, and the only thing he added pretty much was, "I can neither confirm nor deny" some phrase I wrote in there.
Oh, wow. Well, those things, when they're said like that, they stick in your mind above other memories. So, yeah, that just stuck in your mind for 40 years. And so you probably did memorize it almost verbatim because it was such an incredible thing to be saying.
Especially because he was my mentor and was well respected within the office. So, and again, I was a sponge at that point. I was really, really nervous, and that was a bombshell during the first week.
Yes. Wow. So you became aware of the aliens early on. Now, did you believe him?
Oh, when did you see one?
Or did you get this? Yeah. What happened next?
Well, what I did is, as I started to meet more people and we'd go to lunch, they wanted me to socialize. And so they would turn me around and introduce me to different offices so people in the building would know, faces. And I made friends with individuals in different organizations. And when I had an opportunity in the non-business area, like we'd go out for lunch on a Friday and have a beer at a place that burned down long ago, I'd ask them, I'd say, "Hey, Doug, what's this thing with the aliens?" And everybody, to a person, would say, "Oh, yeah, sure, everybody knows." And I think the reason that everybody knew about it was the fact that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was the home to 3 very important UFO-related public relations projects that I'm sure most of your listeners have heard about. There was Project Sign, Project Grudge, and then, of course, the famous Project Blue Book.
Mm-hmm.
So before I arrived, they had from 1947 to 1969, they had those programs at Wright-Patterson. They were not secret. Some of the things they did might have been secret, but the fact that they were at Wright-Patterson was well known. Information from that project readily made its way around the base. It was in the newspapers, it was on radio, it was on television. So Wright-Patterson's culture had this UFO thing that gave them an identity. And I think everybody grabbed onto that as something, I don't know, of bragging rights or to make them feel more important or to be part of something that was so big and was international in nature. So everybody was aware of that. And I have no idea where the aliens in the tunnels germinated from, but that was kind of the going history that everyone would give you. They wanted to give you a thumbnail description of what they knew.
Okay. Did they ever elaborate on the tunnels
And what they saw.
and what they saw? Did anybody ever tell you
And the
anything?
aliens that came out.
Well, you know, I think at that point you're talking to people in the management operations office and people working in the laboratory. And this is what I think everybody really needs to understand. Jesse Marcel, I think in 1978, told Stanton Friedman, there's two things you need to know, Stan. One is I handled the material, and I can tell you it was not a weather balloon. And the second thing you can take to the bank is the recovered material was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is immutable, undeniable, unimpeachable source. The man was the first person to go to the Foster Ranch and grab the material, put it in his car. He had it for 24 hours. He was the one that was tasked to make sure it made it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So, you know, in years past, in 1978 forward, when that started to become known, now everybody said, oh, you know, 10 years ago, Blue Book ended, but guess what? This guy came out and he's the most believable witness you could ever possibly have. So, you know, for the further years, I think a lot of people start snooping around and we're looking and we're hoping to see something. The fact of the matter is, by the time I got on base in 1973 as a co-op student, from 1947, they had over 20 years to hide, bury, obfuscate this stuff in a vault, a skiff, or wherever they put it in. And even by then, it might have gone to a facility that had better equipment and had better experts than Wright-Patterson might have had, even though in 1947, that's where they would have taken the material. So to answer your question, I only think the people who saw it were the people who needed to see it, you know, the 2, 3, 4 scientists who were evaluating it, you know, and maybe some, you know, top administrator. For the most part, you don't get into facilities like that unless you've got a chest full of badges and passwords and everything else. You're just not going to see it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what did you see?
Well,
if
you
anything.
know, I think in my book, what I try to do is I went to look for evidence and I took the big picture. So, for example, one day I was out on a golf course. I know it's a strange place, but I spent a lot of time there in the summer. And one of the holes, hole number 10 at Prairie Trace Golf Course, which is at Patterson, borders the intelligence campus of what was formerly called FTD. It's now called NASIC. And from that location, I spotted a person who was dressed as a man in black. Literally on the campus of an intelligence agency. I take that back. Their parking lot ends right at the corner of the middle of that fairway, but you have to cross the perimeter road to get to the shade trees, which would technically be 10 feet away from the edge of the campus of the intelligence agency. And all I can tell you is it's close enough for me. It's horseshoes and hand grenades.
Yeah.
And I am.
So what does a man in black actually look
like?
like?
A suit and a tie?
Yeah, so what makes a man in black, you know, stand out from people who just wear suits and ties? How do you know that that's something unique?
Well, that's a very good question. The gentleman was in dark shoes, dark pants, dark sport coat, dark tie, white shirt, and a man in black standard issued hat. Okay, it's 85 degrees outside in the shade. Who wears that get up, especially the hat? And I guess I should have memorized the page that the photo was on, but if you go to my Wright-Patterson chapter in the book, you'll see a photograph of that person in their man in black. It's actually on page 189. And what you'll see,
got it.
You'll see the man in the hat, you'll see his dark suit, and you'll see the parking lot of the intelligence agency, and he's literally standing on the grass directly across from the parking lot.
Now, does he exude a different energy than your average human being? Does he feel terrestrial, extraterrestrial? Like he has some kind of powers?
I didn't sense any of that. What I did notice was that the color of his skin was highly unusual. And again, I described that in the book. It was not normal. It wasn't a tan. It was more of an olive color. He was totally bald because I actually went up to him. Have you ever heard that song by Bruce Springsteen called Rosalita? And in there's a character called Big Balls Billy.
No, I missed that one, but yeah, maybe I have.
Yeah, well,
Go ahead. Sounds great.
Someday when Bruce Springsteen reads my book and he reads the story in there about my two discussions with the man in black, he's going to replace the character Big Balls Billy in his song with my name.
So you went up to this guy and talked to him.
All right, so that's the next part. What did he say to you? What did you converse about?
Well, I saw him in the shadows, and I drove up, and I actually had a second mission that day besides playing golf. There's a graveyard there that has a strange history, and there's also a strange marker there, which we can get into later if we have time. And I wanted to take a photograph. I wanted to take a photograph of this cemetery because it actually had been in a different location prior to the building of a large complex of buildings on the base in the late 40s. And so everything was disinterred and it was moved. And as crazy as it sounds, this guy was standing about 20, 25 feet away from that cemetery. And it wasn't until I had gone past him that I actually noticed him because I was getting out to shoot a photo of that graveyard. And I could not help but notice his proximity to the intelligence campus and the graveyard, and I had to talk to him. And I did engage him in a conversation on that day and one almost exactly 4 weeks later.
So how do you go up to a man in black, and what's the first thing you say?
Did he have an accent?
You know, he did not have an accent, but in the back of my head, I'm going, oh my God, it's a man in black. It's a man in black. Oh my God. Stay cool. Try to stay cool. So this is really clever banter on my part. I didn't actually, this is being sarcastic. And I said, because the graveyard was overgrown, I said, you think they take better care of that graveyard, don't you? He's like, I can read his thoughts. He's going like, what is this guy saying to me about the graveyard? I have no interest in the graveyard. And so I thought, oh, witty banter. How do you begin the conversation? So you begin about something that you can both look at. And I had seen that graveyard before, and I had to act though as if I'd never seen it. Because I was there to take a photograph of it. So he said, well, yeah, it's summertime now. They'll be cutting it. And so after a few, non-issues, I said to him, I don't know if anyone's ever said this to you or not, but with that suit and tie and, it's so hot out here and that hat. I said, you just remind me of the mythological man in black. I just laid it out right then and there because I figured, I've only got one life to live. Why not make it exciting?
Right. And what did he say?
And he just kind of looked at me, and he had this iPad or something, some smartphone in his hand. He kind of was really focusing on that. And after a while, he said, oh, yeah? I said, yeah. I said, especially that hat. I said, it's so hot out here. And without a moment's hesitation, he reaches up and he takes the hat off of his head, and he gives me like a ta-da, ta-da. And he exposes his head and his face. And I guess I was supposed to figure out that he was bald, so he was wearing a hat to cover his bald head.
Woo! Oh, interesting.
But that wasn't the reveal, because what had happened is his face was shaded by the tree and by the hat, so he had this kind of unusual tint to his face, which I thought was just a play of the shadows. But when he took the hat off, I could clearly see that he wasn't tan. He had a very odd color to his entire head, face. So it was like, whoa, you not only did he not answer the mystery, he opened up a whole new one for me.
Wow. Could you see the color of his hands also?
Was his whole body the same color?
Well, he was fully dressed.
Olive?
He was fully dressed.
No, but when he reached for the, you could see his hands, right?
Well, again, he's in the shadow, and I'm trying to think about how far I was at that time. I might have been 10 or 15 feet away, but when he does a ta-da thing, he cups it so his hand is supinated, and so the hat's covering that hand, and the other hand was busy with his smartphone or whatever he had in that hand, and honestly, I was focused only on his head. The last thing I was concerned about was his hands. It was just his head. It was very, very unusual. And it took me.
His whole scalp was that same color.
Exactly. And to me, it did not have a healthy tan look. It looked like a light olive drab. So, we talked about him being a man in black, and, he didn't say that. And then I had another conversation with him a month later where I actually offered him a cut of any of the royalties from my book should I hit it big, after expenses, if he would let me take his picture.
And he did.
No, he didn't.
Okay, what happened then?
When he turned around, I whipped out my cell phone. I took one quick picture and I got the hell out of there.
Now, how tall was he? Was the shape of his head normal, or was it abnormal? Could you see at any time his eyes? Were they normal or unusual? What other things about him?
No, he didn't have the man in black eyelids, that closed a certain way. I didn't really look into his eyes. Maybe I was afraid to, but I was just looking at the skin. That was my focus. I think he was probably my height, which is about 5'11". Right now I'm in training for a marathon, so I'm down to 165, but I'm usually about 175. He was probably right there. And, I'd invite the readers of my book to go to that page where the man in black is, and based upon, dimensions of his shoulders and the other anthropometrics that they can gain from that photograph, maybe try to calculate if his head was a little bit bigger. It didn't seem to me to be that way. It wasn't shockingly so. It was just the color I was focusing on.
If it was the meeting was somehow purposive and arranged by a higher intelligence, what was the significance of your meeting with this fella and talking to him twice?
Well, I think the significance came out when I briefed the North Carolina MUFON organization back in May. And I do a segment in my talk that I call Stump the Author. And the way that works is I will take parts of my book and I'll put them into the presentation as a shameless ad for my book, but I want people to know, I want them to understand what's in there. And then we'll do some things just at random. So things that I don't, and I obviously could take, 8 days to try to explain what's in my book. I'll put the table of contents up there and let the audience vote on something that they want to hear about. And extemporaneously, they'll choose a topic. And that day they chose Men in Black. So I told a story similar to what I told you. And I made the statement that, hey, if they have Men in Black as guests in FTD, which is now NASIC, they probably have other intelligence agencies that are also in there because that's the way those agencies work. Mm-hmm. And I let it go at that. And in the book signing, the last guy, after it was all over, he came up to me and he said, well, I just want you to know that your story of the Man in Black is spot on.
Mm.
So I looked at him and I said, well, how do you know? Because, I could have written anything. Now, obviously, there's a picture of the guy in there, so I back up the narrative in the book with a photo. But, the story, I tell a little bit more it's in the book. That's the premium that people get when they come hear me talk. And the guy said, well, when I left the OSI after 30 years, I was a senior agent. And I'm here to tell you, your story of the Man in Black is spot on. Now, do you know who the OSI is?
No. Say that again. Who is the OSI?
OSI is the Office of Special Investigations. They're the investigative arm of the U.S. Air Force. They're very powerful.
Okay.
They're very powerful. They're very inquisitive. They're very thorough. And this man was telling me that he had worked as an OSI agent for 30 years. He departed as a senior agent. Do I know if he was telling the truth? I have no idea. I just found it fascinating that an individual was actually validating my Man in Black story.
So was he, I have two more questions on this and we'll go to another topic. Was this gentleman, were his features Caucasian? And the second question is, what part of your story was he validating? Was there something that you could tell our listeners that were kind of, what was this guy's agenda for being there? Yeah. Okay. Why did he say he was there?
He was an alien.
Wait,
yeah, go ahead.
Why did the Man in Black say he was standing there?
Yeah. Did you ever get around like, hey, what are you doing here?
No. I had to simply assume that he was there because they're not allowed to use personal devices inside the building. It has no windows and it's shielded. So it's no radio in, no radio waves come in, no radio waves come out. So if you're going to do...
he came out to use his iPad or whatever it was.
Yeah, you couldn't use a smartphone, your iPad, whatever it was. So personal devices are not allowed inside. So if you want to communicate, like, send an email to your wife and say, we're going to meet at lunch or, pick up the kids, you got to do it outside the building. So the reason he was outside was obviously to do that, to work on his device. I could only assume that since he was on the campus that he works in that building, because there are no other buildings in that area that he could have walked to that spot that I saw him at. So it was just, a given.
Okay. And then what were his features? Caucasian or some other, did he have any racial characteristics?
Definitely Caucasian, nothing, unusual about eyebrows or eyelids or ears or anything like that. Just the color of his skin and the fact that, who dresses like that?
Right. Who dresses like that?
Was he wearing a weapon?
Not that I could see. And I would imagine that weapons. I would imagine that unless you have special dispensation, there's probably no weapons in that building except for the security police.
How do people typically dress for working in that building?
Well, that time of year, the laboratory is pretty casual. Many buildings are a little bit less casual. And people will wear sport coats and ties. Nobody wears a Man in Black fedora. That's just unheard of. First and last time I ever saw that on base.
So if he was a regular at that building, don't you think he would amend his dress code to match, when in Rome, dress like the Romans, right? Or did he intentionally want to stand out in the crowd? Do you have any, just hypothesizing from what you were observing there. I mean, I would wonder, okay, so you're dressed like this, it's this hot. What was behind that?
My
uniform.
Yeah, my thought is these guys got to be somewhere during the day. And why not at the home of the intelligence agency that hosted the UFO public relations programs for nearly 20 years? And why not dress, as you do dress every day? Because what if you get a call that you've got to go out and you have to do your business that men in black do? So you've got the uniform. You've
got to go intimidate somebody.
Yeah, well, gather evidence, obfuscate evidence, whatever it is they do, you're at the ready. You're not going to go out and buy a hat on the way to your operation.
That's hilarious. Okay, I'm ready to go on to another topic. But any final words you want to tell our listeners about your Man in Black incident? He sounds like a character. I'd love to meet him. Hey, if you're listening, give us a call. Call into the show. But go ahead.
I've actually had another Man in Black experience, not on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Okay, tell us about that one.
Well, I'd like to, but I'm going to save that story for my next book.
All right, here's a cliffhanger for the next book. Okay, let's see, what time is it? Okay, we have some time.
Oh, come on, Ray. It's obvious you've been chosen as a leaker, as somebody that they want to communicate to the world.
Well, it could be just coincidence. Think about it. I spent from 1973, January of 73 to September of 2011 on that base. And the odds of me seeing something have to be better than the standard Joe who can't even get on the other side of the fence. And it just so happened that, I was playing golf that day. I don't have a full membership there. So when I go in, I pay cash. So there's not an advance notice. I didn't have a tee time the 2 times I saw him. So it's just totally random. And I just suspect that he's out there every day doing a smartphone thing. And I just happened to see him on 2 of those occasions. And, And you do bring up an interesting point there where when I did the briefing to the MUFON group in May, I opened up for questions because I think everybody who talks on this subject needs to be open to public cross-examination. So I opened it up for my examination, and the first question was, have they tried to kill you yet?
Have they? Yes, that's a good question.
Well, no, tongue in cheek, I said, yeah, once, but they missed, obviously.
Has there been any punishment or sanctions upon you?
Yeah, for writing this book, coming out.
Oh, well, there's a whole litany of things that have gone wrong since the book was ready to be published. And again, I won't get into it now. We'll probably write it up in the next book, but I have photographic evidence. And that's one of the things that I really lean on. If I've got a narrative there, I'm there investigating it, and I put down what I believe to be factually true. And if possible, I'll try to enhance it or verify it with photographs. And clearly, things have gone on since my book was getting ready to be published all the way through the present day.
Well, it's a very clever title, and it draws the eye. And then, of course, people are aware of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base being the place where the Grays were sent. So I think it's going to be a very successful series. So it sounds like you're going to make this a series. And so I'm looking forward. I haven't read the book yet, but we'll talk after we've read the book, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of more questions and some more detail for you. Okay, so you're holding the second Men in Black thing until your next book. What else would you like us to focus on in this first hour of the show about your book?
Well, I think maybe we could get into a couple of reasons for writing my book.
Okay, take it away.
What was my motivation? And I think I had a handful of very good reasons at the time. First, when I retired in 2011, as a result of an auto accident, strange, young man ran a red light, I wound up hitting his car, and then a truck hit me from behind. So I wound up
Ouch.
I wound up having to retire a couple of years early. I had a herniated disc in my neck. I had strained abdomen muscles. I had some Achilles issues, that kind of thing. But here's the good thing that happened. I used my engineering mathematics to determine that had I arrived at that point 1.5 seconds sooner, I would not be speaking to you today.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
Because he was barreling through the light. He had a huge Cadillac, and I had a Honda, which, the metal is so thin. He would have hit me right in the driver's door, and that would have been all she wrote. So for the grace of God, in 1.5 seconds, we're here today.
Wonderful. So you're here to give us a message.
Apparently. So, and the reason that I wrote the book was when I retired in 2011 with that as background, I wanted to do three things. I wanted a short list because, when you retire, you don't want to drive yourself nuts. I wanted to become a paranormal investigator, and I've been dabbling in that, and I'm enjoying it. I wanted to learn how to play the guitar. That's the second thing. And the third thing is I wanted to write a book. So,
and you've done all three?
Done that. Well, I have a friend who's teaching me how to play the guitar. I know one song, so clearly you cannot put a check mark there. I have been doing investigations of UFOs and ETs, so you can put kind of a half check mark at the first one. And I've written a book, and so I think my master plan with only 3 points to it is working out extremely well.
Well, you started the conversation that you went towards a graveyard. Were you interested in that type of paranormal, ghosts and those type of things?
No.
You said there was some kind of strange marker there or something.
Yes. I went to the graveyard. That's a great point. I went to the graveyard because I postulated that if we had alien bodies, as the mythology calls for, that came to Wright-Patterson, and they evaluated them, the living, the dead. After they had derived the scientific evidence, what would they do with the deceased aliens? And I posit that what they would have done is they would have given them a Christian burial. And the reason is they would have given them a Christian burial, and here's why. And you can use that term, I don't mean it religiously, but I mean it in terms of the way we do things on this planet. We put people in a mausoleum or in an urn or in the ground or ashes or whatever it is. And it would have been, we would have acted the same way we would want creatures on another planet to act if one of our astronauts should die in their backyard. We would want that respect. And I went all through Wright-Patterson and determined the places where alien bodies could have been easily laid to rest and could still be there today with nobody being any wiser. And that little graveyard with 8 graves right next to the intelligence agency is a perfect location because it's isolated from the rest of the base. You have a golf course on one side, you have a parking lot on the other, you have empty space on the other. There is no other building within hundreds of yards of that location. And you have security cameras outside that building that look out onto all that property. So it could be under 24/7 surveillance. You could have a burial in the middle of the night on a weekend when you have bare bones personnel there. You bring over a chaplain. He says a few words. You put the creature to rest in that graveyard, and nobody would know the difference. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to take that photograph, because I had other photographs in different seasons, and I wanted to show that graveyard in that summer season. So that is one of the places I posit that they could have. It would have been a great place to bury an alien.
Now, what about Jackie Gleason and Nixon going to see the bodies at Wright-Patterson? Have you ever heard that story, and do you think it's true?
Well, it actually wasn't. They didn't go to Wright-Patterson. They went to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida.
Homestead, okay. So were they the same aliens? Did they ship them down there?
Well, I've been questioning on that.
Different aliens?
People who've read my book go, well, there's only one shipment. How do you know they went to Wright-Patterson? Well, actually, if you read works by like Leonard Stringfield, who was the Wright-Patt expert for many years, he writes all about alien crashes. In fact, the Roswell story has a story that says the plains of San Agustin had a crash the same week as Roswell, and it was probably two ships that hit each other. One went down in Corona, one went down on the plains of San Agustin. So there's more than one crash from which aliens could have gotten into government hands. Now back to the Homestead question. Knowing what I know about the simple thing that you have to have a need to know makes me believe that President Nixon did not take Jackie Gleason to see aliens at Homestead Air Force Base. First, the logistics involved in that would have been incredible. The commander-in-chief would have gone missing for several hours. Not happening, especially without a security detail. Taking a person who had a huge public persona, Jackie Gleason, who was a known drinker and couldn't keep a secret if his life depended upon it, which he didn't. There are serious people that I believe would be in control of this stuff. It wouldn't have happened because every president who's tried to do it, ask Clinton, ask Carter, ask Bush's, ask all those guys. They all said they tried to get an answer and none of them could. And what was the reason? They didn't have a need to know. So I find that story difficult to believe.
Oh, I think it's cute. I'd like to believe it.
We can go back a little bit earlier. That I've read a number of accounts of Truman and Roosevelt having full knowledge of what was going on.
Yeah.
Well, that was early on, and I would agree with you. I think those two had full knowledge. In fact, Eisenhower, it's a no-doubter in my mind, and Truman definitely. But after that, it was deep sixed, and I think it was just decided that Truman said, you know what, this is really too dangerous. I think this is on a need-to-know basis. Get your group together, and you're going to decide who it is.
So you don't think they get what do you call that? When they get elected, they certainly couldn't tell Trump. they tell him about it.
Stanton Friedman showed us this thing saying that if you're asked about certain programs, you must lie. Otherwise, you're breaching your contract with the United States.
Yeah, so they could the briefing. So you don't think the presidents get a briefing on that, or some of them have? What about Jackie Kennedy or John Kennedy with Planet Serpo, the Serpo story, the Ebens? What do you think of that story? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that story.
Okay, we'll talk about that in the
future. Of one of our astronauts who did an exchange program with people from Serpo who had been snooping on our nuclear facilities at Los Alamos, and there was a crash, and their mechanic survived, and he called to his ship, and they arranged an exchange with an ambassador. They sent 12 American astronauts, anonymous. They kept hidden to Serpo for 12 years, and this is in the Zeta Reticuli group, and 4 of them wound up living there. And some of them returned, but the ones that died, that was when you said about Christian burial. The commander of the Americans was just shocked that the aliens immediately took the body and started using its body parts, and they wanted to give it a Christian burial.
Yeah, So that's another someday. What's his name that wrote that? Len Kasten. It'd be good if you looked at that since you're in this field now. and give us in a future show. We'll talk about that. I don't want to really talk about something you haven't had a chance to read, but that is an interesting story which shows that Kennedy was in the know, and of course one of the reasons that these later movies that are about Kennedy and his assassination is because he knew too much. So anyway, we can talk about that later. I'm going to talk about what you know. And so let's continue with your story. Focus on you this episode. And there was something else I wanted to ask, but now we went somewhere and I can't remember what it was. But keep talking and I'll think of what I wanted to ask.
I'll tell you where we're at. I was going through the reasons why I wrote my book, and so I have two more reasons why I wanted to write the book. And the first was I wanted to write a book, so I checked that off. The second reason that I wrote a book is I've been studying this field for many years, and I wanted to make a factual contribution in the field of ufology that can be appreciated at all levels, from those who know nothing about the field but will be motivated to learn more after reading my book, all the way to the experts who'll say, hey, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to me because I've read a number of books. In fact, in my book, I call out the authors of a current popular UFO book, and I prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that a couple of their major stories in there are all fabrication. And it just cheeses me off to see these so-called researchers who do most of their stuff, at least for that book, from the comfort of their internet screen, and get the simplest facts wrong, and then take the most dramatic story about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and it's a complete fabrication. And I basically take them to task in my book about that. So I wanted to make sure that, I don't know, I was trying to raise the bar maybe for the researchers and go, hey, don't put any more BS out there, because it's hard enough for somebody trying to get into this field to just understand it and then have to sift through all the BS that's out there. So I didn't appreciate it. It really caused a lot of bumps in the road for me. And that was a motivation. I wanted to put something out there that I was 100% sure of. If I'm wrong, I want someone to tell me that. I'm not, perfect. I'm sure there's mistakes. And if they're factual mistakes, I'd like to hear about it. And the last thing is I wanted to establish myself as the Wright-Patt UFO investigator go-to guy, much like Leonard Stringfield was. And he uses information network to gather and reveal some of the most seminal information to the community on UFO crash retrievals. And he had a lot of inside contacts. I think people reading my book, like this former OSI agent, they might have something they want to get off their chest. And I'd like to hear it. Now, I'm not going to publish it unless I can convince myself that it's true, because I like first-person research. But somebody might say something significant that I can publish later. And that's the third reason. I think I don't want to be bored in retirement. I think I can still make another contribution.
That's great. I'm glad. Well, we need everybody looking at this material. I think there's so much information and disinformation and interpretations. And, like, for example, these crashes, I had a couple whistleblowers that said that the gray aliens, the one variation of gray that they worked with in their secret space program, wanted to accelerate humanity's evolution of consciousness and technology. And so many of the crashes were intentional. They said there's no way that any Earth technology could ever make our ships crash. So all these crashes were kind of like to put in this new technology, knowing very well that humans would reverse engineer it and start helping them catch up in the cosmos with the Federation. So I've heard that story. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well,
Dr. Lessin, you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead. You first, Ray.
Well, I would think that if they wanted us to have their technology, they would have crashed it without sacrificing some of their own personnel. So I find that difficult to believe at this point, but I've not investigated it. If you think about the circumstances of what happened in the Roswell crash, Corona, if you will. Imagine if you have two spaceships and there was a huge lightning storm in the area. We also had high-powered radar, And I'm not saying the radar took down the craft. What I'm saying is that imagine an electrical strike hits one of the ships and they're traveling at their light speed, and it disrupts their navigational and control capabilities just for a fraction of a second. And there happens to be a second craft in the area that they hit. So they crashed not because of what we did, but maybe a lightning strike that affected the interior of their craft. They now, what's that statement? If the immovable force, hits the, unchangeable object, what's going to happen? Well, they're both going to suffer some damage. One goes down in Corona, the other one kind of gets dominoed and crashes on the plains of San Agustin. And if they're going to give us technology by crashing their ships intentionally, they're certainly not going to do it in the plains of San Agustin where there's one person for every 100,000 square miles. Nor are they going to do it in the northern desert outside Roswell where there's nothing but sheep. So I just find that scenario a little bit untenable.
Okay, we'll address that. We come back. We'll be back in about 3 to 5 minutes, and you're listening to The Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, you'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Listen in on Mondays, 8 Eastern Time on Revolution Radio for Journeys with JP. With a variety of guests, each giving their perspective on their journey into the now. Join me and my guests, Mondays, 8 p.m. Eastern on Revolution Radio Studio B.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com with your host Janet Kara Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin and our guest Raymond-Szymanski. Yep, that's how I pronounce it. And before we get back to our show, I want to remind everybody to please go over to the donation button on freedomslips.com and make your donation. $1, $10, $15, $20, $100, whatever you can spare, whatever you can donate would be greatly appreciated. And we do thank you very much for your donation. Can you, yes, dear, can you hear me?
I hate to interrupt you. We do have a special going for a $50 donation. Hawk will send you a half pound of his mother's fudge. And it is awesome. I've had some of it. And if you add an extra $10, they'll throw in cashews that have been soaked in bourbon.
Excellent. Thank you, Thomas.
It sounds like
sounds good. So how do they do that? Just go over and...
just put it in the donation page in the comments that's what it's for and the address.
Excellent. Will do. Okay. So... Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say? And then I have a couple points.
We've been looking at all the different accounts of whether the ETs that have had the craft fall into hands that sometimes brought them to Wright-Patterson, other places. We have some account by some of my colleagues of the crash by Kingman, of the jail in Kingman actually having live aliens that walked away from the site. We have the story of the ambassador that was sent from Serpo. So there's a lot. And so I know you've seen more than. Did you see craft? That's the other thing I wanted to know. What did you see in the way of unusual extraterrestrial or our clandestine secret anti-grav and other unusual craft?
Okay, we'll get to that answer in a moment. I just wanted to add to answer your question, Ray, is. They wouldn't be sacrificing their own personnel, but what they use are avatars. These are not their actual form. They, just like the movie Avatar, they put their people that they're sending down into these artificial forms, and so they are expendable, but they are not really dying. And the other reason why whistleblower or some of them had said is that these are Trojan horses. So we take them into our facilities like Wright-Patterson, and now they have a very up close and personal system, and it's actually across the planet where they can spy on us on a level that they wouldn't have had we not taken them right into the bases. So I found that interesting. So back to you, and we do want to answer Dr. Lessin's question, and we want to get back to soft disclosure in this second half of the show.
Okay, so was his question, what have I seen?
Go ahead. Talk about have you seen any craft, or what else did you see when you were there?
Any aliens that were alive, any craft that is real fast,
No one on the base except for maybe a handful of people who are directly involved in the evaluation and exploitation of those materials or of those aliens would have ever seen anything. So since I was not on the alien program, even the people who were doing the investigation, like the Blue Book people, they wouldn't have been able to see that either. So it's probably just a handful of folks that have ever seen this stuff. Wow. However, I have had a UFO sighting, a very up close and personal sighting, which I describe in full in my book.
Well, give us a hint about it.
I was driving home from a physical therapy appointment because of my accident, and I saw something catch the corner of my eye through my moonroof. Then I poked my head down beneath the windshield, and I saw a very large craft, probably 100 feet across, with round, they look like lights, slip into the clouds. It was about 200 feet in front of me and about 75 foot off the ground.
Wow.
Wow. Was it relating to you in any way, or did it just seem to be there?
I think it just seemed to be there, but the interesting part is when, I had a 7 or 8 second look, but considering that the craft was following southbound North Fairfield Road, when I went to a Google map and I extrapolated a straight line of that road back towards Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, if the craft was following a straight line, it would have flown directly over the middle of the main runway at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Interesting. So do you think it might have come from there?
No, we don't have that technology. If we have that kind of technology, what we need to do is tell the world about it, point at it, and say, if you mess with us, this is what you're going to get. and all war would end. ISIS would be running for the hills. So no, it's not ours. Wasn't ours.
Okay. So we were going to talk about soft disclosure. What would you like to tell our listeners about Sasha's initial question? What you're talking about, soft disclosure.
Yeah, I want to get back to that because I believe the insinuation was, do you think that maybe you're being used as a vehicle for soft disclosure? And my answer to that is, man, I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
Because
are there any indications that is the case? Anything that make you think that?
I'm going to have to think hard about it. Nothing has really hit me in the face because what I found is a result of really hard investigative work, and no one's really handed me anything. Now, if I get a package in the mail, like a lot of these folks have gotten, that says top secret this or that, I would jump on it. But right now, it's just been, I do a talk and someone goes, hey, I got something interesting to tell you because they attended my talk. And then, we'll have a discussion on it. But it's not like I'm getting a package with top secret material that's been declassified and it's something that I should tell the world about. It just hasn't happened yet.
So the title of your book is 50 Shades of Grays. Can you tell us more about that? Are there 50 grays, different variations? What's behind your title?
Actually, I was just looking for a catchy title. And it turns out, if you are well read in ufology, everybody knows about the grays. And so I thought, this 50 Shades of Gray has got 1 billion hits on Google. Can you copyright a title? So I checked both in the United Kingdom and in the United States. It turns out you cannot copyright a title of a book.
Right.
Right.
So
I have 100
I'm sorry?
books with the same title. You could have 100 books titled Lincoln. No one owns the title.
Yes, you could. And so I thought, it would be a great play on words. And I'm not indicating there are 50 Shades of Grays, but it was a great attention getter.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a couple of weeks to actually get it up so that the Google engine could find it because it kept coming up with the erotica book.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, I had friends who immediately were looking on Amazon to try to find it, and they're going, dude, you just won't believe what kind of stuff I'm getting on my searches. So I advise them to put 50 Shades in. If you put the words 50 Shades in and my last name, or now if you put 50 Shades UFO or 50 Shades Wright-Patterson, my book comes up. But it took a while.
So it took a while. Yeah, I was wondering about that. Now, it says evidence of extraterrestrial visitation to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. What kind of evidence are you presenting in this book?
Okay, well, the book is a travel adventure. It's a quest. Some people have said it's laugh out loud funny because there's a lot of misadventures in there, and many of them, of course, are humorous. It's a travel guide to places that I went to. It's a UFO expose. It's a coming of age. There's a lot of different titles you could give this book. But what it was for me was a chance to prove to myself that all this stuff about UFOs and extraterrestrials that I had read in dozens and dozens of books and seen on television was factual. It was my opportunity to go out there and put my finger in the hole, as it were, and determine if this thing was indeed true. So I went to some famous places. I met with famous people. I met with witnesses and experts. And the first part of my book details my investigation for the 1965 incident at Exeter from Exeter, New Hampshire. Then I have a chapter on Travis Walton, and Travis and I got to spend an entire day together. And Travis is actually, he's obviously one of the most famous UFO experiencers ever. And I had a chance to do, mano a mano with him, and I'll get into that a little bit. Then I went to Rendlesham. I went to Rendlesham Forest in the southeast coast of England, and I've had a chance to interview all of the principals and talk with them, including Jim Peniston, John Burroughs, and Colonel Halt. I've actually was in the forest for a night and a day. And then I investigated the mythology, I'll put that word in quotes, of Wright-Patterson and its historical connections to UFOs. So I thought, those are four solid things that if I investigate it and I can convince myself that those things are true, then most of the other stuff that I'm reading from reputable researchers has got to have at least a hint of truth in them.
So what do you do when you find that there are some of the stories are off? Do you write about it? How do you convey this information to people? And how do you validate if something's on and something isn't? If something isn't true.
For example, John Fuller wrote in his book Incident at Exeter about the first time that Norman Muscarello going down the highway, very dark road, and he was in front of the Russell home, and this 90-foot lighted orb came out and chased him, and he took refuge behind a stone wall. And then as the thing started to descend, he thought he was going to be crushed, so he ran across the road. Well, in John Fuller's description, I'm imagining in my mind this Mel Gibson Braveheart siege height wall, 8 foot built of massive stones. And of course, Norman Muscarello drops down and he hides behind this massive wall. Well, when I locate the Russell property and I introduce myself to the person who's living there, who turns out is Arthur Russell, the son of Clyde Russell, who's mentioned prominently in John Fuller's book, I note that the rock wall is only about 18 inches high. So I turned to Arthur and I said, Arthur, the history, the book, all that. I said, it says Norman Muscarello dove behind this stone wall to take refuge. I said, look at that. And he looks at me, and he's a farmer, and you cannot argue with farmer logic. He looks at me and he goes, well, maybe it was taller back then.
Maybe it was.
So what I do is I point that out to the reader. I point out these little discrepancies, and I point out other facts that basically enhance the story. And in most of the cases, I will give the geographic locations so that people can follow in my footsteps, and they can go to the Russell home. They can go to where Muscarello first, saw the object. They can go to the field. They can go to the Exeter Hotel where John Fuller wrote a lot of his book there. So I leave these breadcrumbs for all these stories. I do the same thing. I do the same thing for Travis Walton, except I promised him I would not show where he was abducted from. And I do have things at Wright-Patt and Rendlesham Forest, so people can get on Google Maps and have a bird's eye view of the places I've been and where the stories were centered.
Do you have a question, Sasha?
No, but it just sounds so similar when Travis took shelter behind this pile of timber that they had piled up to burn on the snow. And it's when he showed himself and came out from behind the timbers that they killed him. And
on board.
And so it was the similar impulse to take shelter behind something. That's what I hear.
Yeah, Travis said he took shelter behind it, and then he went, "Oh, this isn't going to do any good." They can see me here. And then he said, "I better get out of here." And he stood up, and that's when he got hit by the beam.
Well, it's called a pile of slash, and they had a contract.
Mm-hmm.
They had a contract to build these things, and basically what it was is it's a fire gap, so they clear the trees so the whole forest doesn't go up if a fire starts.
Mm-hmm.
And what he had done is, he'd crouched down behind this pile of slash, and when he got up, you said they killed him. Well, actually, that phraseology is probably not correct, and I know it's not correct because Travis told me it's not correct. At least he's changed his mind through the years. When he stood up,
right.
you can imagine these things are interstellar travel, and there's got to be some form of power that runs it. And what I think, as a former electrical engineer, there was something built up, static electricity. You used to shock your brothers and sisters by touching their clothes in the wintertime after you rubbed your feet on the wool carpet. And I think it was just a normal discharge. And the problem is when Travis stood up, and he was right under the craft, there was nothing between Earth and the craft except Travis. And it was just a normal, to be expected electrical discharge that just happens when this high voltage craft happens to be in the area. And they took him on board not to abduct him, but they took him on board to heal him. And that's why he had to spend 5 days on board. And Travis,
when I talked to him just recently, he said that I think that it was more than I was debilitated. I was dead and they revived me. That's what he said.
That's his latest
I would agree
revelation.
with that. I would agree with that. I don't believe he ever told me that directly, but he said, "Well, I was totally burned." Well, what conclusion will I draw?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't.
I think as
but he wasn't killed because it wasn't volitional on their part. I understand your point is well taken.
Yeah, there wasn't volition. The other thing with the depiction, the artist's depiction of where he was hit, and then I am an experiencer, and I remember one time when I came around a corner, they have like a tractor beam and they pull you up. Well, they got me right in the heart chakra, right in the chest, right in the heart chakra, and pulled me up, and then my arms went limp and back. So I found it most curious that his artistic rendering, whoever did it, shows that type of body motion, but perhaps it was too highly charged, and it did reject him, and he, fell
threw him way across.
It threw him across, right? Yeah.
Several feet and knocked him into something and everything.
It lifted him 10 feet in the air and threw him 10 feet backwards.
Right.
Wow, 10 feet.
He got zapped. Whew. Wow. So that's part of your book, the conversations and the revelations you had with Travis.
And one of
the engineering gives you a specific kind of a focus that most of us don't have. That's fascinating.
And it creeps in, but I've always been an unusual kind of engineer. I was never, the math. I think I had C's in math in college. Everything else I did well, and math didn't intrigue me. It was, creating a solution for a problem, technological problem that always intrigued me. Mm-hmm. So that was my interest, and math was just something that I had to bear through for a couple of years because that's the rite of passage for an engineer. You've got to have a strong math background. But I'm more people oriented, and I think that's why I was always program managing. I had a lot of people underneath me. I ran what I call a think tank for the Department of Defense for 10 years. I became the wellness leader. I was the director of the wellness program at Wright-Patterson. So I was always in positions where I had to understand the technology and the people that were doing things for me under contract or in-house, but I had to really manage them more than the technologies themselves.
Gotcha.
So in your book, the description says that you're researching the most polarizing scientific mystery of the century. Do we have aliens? So you've investigated all these different cases. How do you answer that question? Do we have aliens? What's your evidence? What's your proof?
Okay, well, there's really no doubt in my mind that we've been visited. By whom or what, I don't know. Since they're not of this planet, I'll just call them aliens. You know, if I would see them walking down the street every day, I might have a different term for them. But I think the extraterrestrial hypothesis right now is the easiest for me to talk about and for my readers to absorb. You know, I don't talk about people coming back from the other side or other things that I think a majority of people are uncomfortable with. So let's take Exeter, for example. You know, you had this 90-foot glowing orb that came down. Norman Muscarello made his way into town. He was dispatched with an officer, Bertrand. They went out to the same field. Bertrand saw the same thing. It came overhead. He got on the walkie-talkie and told his dispatcher, Scratch Tolan, hey, I see the thing myself, Scratch. And then a second officer, David Hunt, pulls up. I think that was his first name, but Officer Hunt pulls up and he sees the object. And hundreds of people in Exeter, in that area, saw the object. They were hovering over cars. It made cars stop. So there were so many witnesses. There had to be something going on. So that's a slam dunk there. Then, of course, Travis Walton, you know, he had 6 guys in a truck with him. They all saw the UFO. They all saw it. They all passed multiple lie detector tests. In fact, if anything, they wanted to keep their mouths shut because, you know, they were contracted by probably the state or the U.S. government under a contract. Well, you don't want loonies working on your contract in the forest. They could have easily have terminated their contract for any of a number of reasons. So they had no motivation whatsoever to come out and go, yeah, we saw him get zapped. We saw the ship. And when you talk to Travis, and, you know, I had a chance obviously to do it for a day, and we took photographs of the evidence where we looked at tree stumps that were in the area of the centroid of the hovering. And that photographic evidence that I created that day has been integrated into Jennifer Stein's movie called Travis.
Good, cool.
And so
what did you find by examining the tree stumps?
Well, there's an exponential growth on the side of the tree stumps that face towards where the spaceship was. So something radiated the trees, and what I'm guessing is not only did it radiate it, you know, instantaneously for how long it was there, it left some residual stuff there that affected the growth of the trees for, you know, 30 years.
So it made it grow faster, you're saying?
It's clear. It is without a doubt. I took the photographs. I was there with Travis. He was pointing out, you know, shoot this one, shoot that one. And then I mapped it out, and I went to the centroid with Jennifer's help. You know, I knew where the trees were, and I knew where the centroid was. And the way that everything mapped out, the closest part of a select number of trees towards that centroid all had this exponentially greater growth.
Wow.
So what are some of the other cases that you've studied?
Well, Rendlesham Forest. And I talked at length with John Burroughs. I had a chance to interview him at length at the International UFO Congress last year. I've had extended conversations with Colonel Halt. And I guess we get along because I have such a long Air Force history. And it turns out that I uncovered a very prominent individual who was stationed at Rendlesham in the Air Force during the time of the incident. And I have connected Colonel Halt to that individual. Now, whether they've talked or not, I don't know. But I think maybe Halt just wants to talk to people who were there to maybe get some additional information. Why, I don't know. But all I can tell you is that Colonel Halt and I have been getting along famously since our first conversation. And I find things from them that cement what they saw. You know, you have a full bird colonel, he's a lieutenant colonel at the time, coming out, and he's the only only Air Force person and maybe military person ever of that rank to come out and say, we chased UFOs through Rendlesham Forest.
Mm-hmm.
So not only, you know, going there and having a man in black experience and some other things happen in Rendlesham, but talking directly to the witnesses and asking them questions that didn't get answered in Nick Pope's book or Left at Eastgate or, you know, any other book that I've read. And you know, it kind of fills the gap of the knowledge. And I said, I really got to know the answer. And when they tell me that and it makes sense, I go, hey, this is a rock solid case. So that's some of the stuff I do. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So at Rendlesham, do they have any idea? So that was a military base. Do they know what was behind his landing? I understand that there's some kind of binary code or something.
Yeah, in 1980, it was Christmas, and the east gate of Woodbridge Royal Air Station faces out to the east, of course. That's why they call it East Gate. But there's a forest property there. And the gate guard saw what he thought was a fire in the woods. And because the runway starts right there, they thought maybe a plane coming in had crashed in the forest, had crashed and, you know, missed its runway by, you know, 100 yards. So they called out, and Jim Peniston, John Burroughs, and Ed Cabansag went out to investigate. And while Burroughs and Peniston were out there, because Cabansag had to set up a communication chain because their radios were going dead, Burroughs and Peniston went forward, and they saw this 10-foot side glassy object, triangular in shape, which eventually Peniston put his hand on this glyph that he saw and received a blinding light kind of experience and a lot of electrical static that he felt. And when he got back to his dorm room or his house after the incident, he opened up his notebook and he wrote 16 pages of a string of ones and zeros.
Mm-hmm.
And that string of ones and zeros, he never revealed to anyone, even after he'd been interrogated with sodium pentothal and whatever these agencies used on him for dozens and dozens of interrogations. For some reason, he never mentioned it. Well, 30 years after the fact, Peniston gets together with Burroughs to do a documentary shoot, and Burroughs asked Peniston, hey, do you have that notebook that you used to draw the craft we saw that night? And he says, yeah. So Burroughs is looking through it and he says, what are all these ones and zeros? And Peniston goes, I have no idea. So he tells Burroughs how he wrote them down the day after, the morning after he touched the craft. And Burroughs says, you know what this is? Peniston says, no, for the second time, I have no idea. He says, this is binary code. So I think Linda Moulton Howe went it, had somebody translate it, and they discovered that it was a message from the year 8100, and it's a fascinating interpretation of the ones and zeros.
What did it say?
Well, it says something like exploration of humanity, year 8100, and it gave the geographic coordinates. I think it's 6, it may be 8, but they're unique places on planet Earth. Like it gave a place in Sedona, Arizona, which I actually went to and did an investigation in February, which was going to be included in the next book. It included a place called High Brazil, which is this Atlantis-like city that supposedly sunk off the west coast of Ireland. A temple in China that only royalty was allowed to see. The Great Pyramids of Giza, and on and on and on. The geographic locations, and this was a straightforward interpretation. It's not like the guy had to change strings of ones and zeros and had to manipulate the thing. Every once in a while, a bit might have got flipped, where if he changed a 1 to a 0, then a geographic coordinate made sense. Very, very minimalistic changing of the actual 16-page string of ones and zeros. So it's a fascinating thing, and you can get on the Rendlesham Forest website and you can read all about it. You can go from 1 to 0, and the whole story's there.
Wow. So this is from 8100. So apparently humans are still existing at that point. Is that what the conclusion is in 8100?
That is, and you make sure you go to the site yourself and get the date. 8100 just sticks in my head. Jim Peniston, in later years, after the code came out and he's been doing more documentaries, it was his firm belief that it was, quote, us from the future. That's what Jim.
Okay, there we go.
That and his Jim Peniston's regression sessions actually reveal that he was on board a ship, and he and Burroughs both have missing time. In fact, both of them in their regression sessions, which I found somewhere on the web, indicate that they were actually on board a ship while they were in the forest that night.
That makes sense. So he's on the craft. He's given a download. The download has the message. I'm on the website right now, but I don't have time to go into it while we're chatting. But the Rendlesham Forest Incident.com. I recommend everybody read into that more. Fascinating. Yes. So that's good, because if you look at the Peter Moon series of books on Montauk, they go to 6100 and time seems to end. So perhaps, so this is good news. We're not dead in 6100. we continue. Well, the way things are going now, it makes you wonder if we're going to make it. So it's good to have some kind of information that we're going to get past this point in time where everything's kind of crazy.
The way things are going, they're going to crucify me.
What's that?
Oh, it's just a song.
John Lennon.
The way things are going, yeah. They're going to crucify me.
So we have a chicken laying an egg here. I don't know if you can hear it on the radio show. We have chickens now all of a sudden in our forest in Maui.
Hopefully we haven't laid an egg with you.
I don't know what to do, how to catch chickens in the Maui jungle, but they're all over the place. Okay, back to our show. We are still live. Tell us a little bit more about your chapters in the book, and we are down to the last 25 minutes or so.
Yeah, I want to know about how fast our fastest spacecraft are that you know.
Yeah. Whatever you want to go.
I can't answer that. I don't know. I wish I knew. But I can tell you one of the misadventures that I had that I recorded in the book.
Okay.
And the reason I do so is because I didn't want my book to be this ultra serious work that would turn off people, who about grays and abductions and, too serious. I wanted to show the lighter side, because there is a lighter side to this. And in fact, a couple of those both involved the day I spent with Travis. When we were in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, which is just outside Heber, and we're slip sliding our way up and down these hills because it had snowed in the morning, we come across a herd of wild horses. And I slam on the brakes, which I shouldn't have, and we start like fishtailing, and Travis is like grabbing the overhead handle and the dashboard, and I go, "Oh man, I'm sorry." He goes, "Well, what's going on?" I said, "Horses." And he looks and he sees, and there's a dozen wild horses just up this little hillside, maybe 100 yards away. And he said, "You want to get out?" And I said, "Sure." And before I can do anything, Travis has got the door open, and I'm trying to find my camera lens and my camera because they're not connected, and he's heading out of the vehicle.
Just like you did with
before.
Exactly. And I'm saying to myself, now Travis, the last time you left the safety of your vehicle in these woods, you got a full discharge from a spaceship. and that spent 5 days on it getting repaired. Now you're going to go challenge this herd of wild horses. So he gets across the road because it was all muddy, and we're up to our ankles in mud, and we get on this the place where there's mostly rocks and gravel and kind of sagebrush. So we're off the muddy road, and we're creeping towards this herd, and there's a couple of them looking right at us. So I'm going, now, Travis, what happened if they charge us? And he says, well, they'll stomp you to death.
Oh my God.
Travis is a cowboy.
And he's a forester, so I'm thinking, okay, if it's a bear, you only have to outrun one person in the party. Because the bear is going to get the slowest person. So I'm good with that. But with horses, there's 10 of them, and with this Obamacare thing, they might not be seeing very clearly, so they could just bypass the closest person and stomp the guy who's almost made it to the truck. So I'm asking Travis, and he catches on right away. He's a pretty sharp guy. I said, now Travis, do you ever do any track running? He goes, oh, I'm fast. And I'm thinking, well, I've run 13 marathons, so if it's a long haul, I'm going to make it to the truck first. and of course, I have some great pictures of the book with Travis and the herd, and then we go up and we do our photo shoot, and it's just getting to be twilight again, just about like the same light that Travis saw his craft at, and we encounter the herd again, and of course we get out and we can't resist, and Travis cannot resist getting closer to the herd, and I've got this great close-up of Travis being like 100 feet from one of the big stallions that's looking right at him, and then we casually just walk our way out, and I tell the whole story about it, and then I tell a great story about Travis and the Kardashians when he was on the show, and I have that in the book, and it's probably one of the funniest stories. Everyone loves it.
Oh, that sounds great. Now, I have a question about this whole, I was just thinking of this while you were talking. What in the world was a UFO doing in such a remote location? Has anybody ever thought what was a motivation for the craft to be that close to the ground, that far from nowhere, from anywhere?
Their base wasn't that really close.
Go ahead. Let Ray answer.
That's go ahead. Do you want to intone and...
What do you think? There was a base or something?
Yeah, that's what Travis said. They wound up landing in this a base, and he got out of the plane, and he talked about this. That's what he talked about.
Well, we don't know where the base was. I mean, he
doesn't know where it was.
That could be light years away. You never know because they have different technology. Anyway, Ray, what do you think behind that? Because
it's possible that there was a base nearby, and I have no idea why they would be in the forest at the time. But if you look at a map, and what you'll find is there's a road there called the Mogollon Rim Road. I think it's spelled Mogollon, the Mogollon Rim Road, which runs just south of the Travis Experience site. Well, that was all Native American land. In fact, all the property to the south of the Mogollon Rim Road, I believe, is an Apache reservation today. So the natives of that area talked for centuries about the gods coming down to that area. And it could be, as Travis has mentioned, that they have a base there, maybe a portal. There's plenty of places that you could hide and never be seen. So I think it's just some place that they've been used to coming to for centuries. And Travis and his crew just happened to be in their stomping grounds at the wrong time.
Right, because earlier on we mentioned like the craft are shot down or they hit each other, and it's always somewhere remote. Like Roswell is pretty remote, and Corona. So what do you think is going on there that they aren't close to populated areas? Is that probably more the norm than the exception?
Well, I think they've done a few slip-ups. The Phoenix Lights is one example. And, maybe, maybe they had spring break somewhere, and you had certain waves, like the wave of 52. You had the Belgian wave. You have numerous other waves, which I think are just joyriding college kids out on spring break from some planet, and they go, hey, let's go harass the Earthlings for a while. But for the most part, I think, I think it's a stealthy operation. You read books. Yvonne Smith is one of my books endorsers. She wrote a couple of great books. One I think is Contact. The other one is Coronado, and it talks about extraterrestrial abduction. You yourself are an experiencer, so that there's a large program of this ongoing, and I don't believe they would want to panic the public to know about this. So they're not doing it openly. If they wanted just to get people, just go to a shopping mall, boom, 5,000 people, piece of cake.
Right.
One of these stories that Leith and others tell about Roosevelt had wanted to go public at one point, and they said, let's test it, Mr. President. We'll hire this guy, Orson Welles, and he'll do H.G. Wells's Invasion of Mars, and we'll see if the public can handle that kind of information. And of course, they escalated it in such a way that Roosevelt was convinced, and we better keep it secret. So here we are today.
Well, I don't think that's the best story to use for, testing the audience about.
No, they were deliberately trying to get the president to keep it secret so that they could control things.
Right. So back to soft disclosure. You're investigating all this stuff. There are more and more people, starting to come into this, wanting to get involved. I think it's going to take all of us to put the pieces of the puzzle together to get the whole picture. What would you like to add about your path and how you went from, just a normal person to this is what you want to do in your retirement?
I've been interested in this topic since I was growing up on the east side of Detroit, and I would come outside in the winter when it was nice and crisp and clear and look at the skies. And then later when the space program happened, you'll see if we could spot the capsule going overhead. Then I became, a scientist / engineer for the Air Force. And, the first day the guy tells me, hey, have you heard about the aliens in the tunnel? And
wow. Yeah.
And so there's curiosity, and I just had a curiosity about space. And now some guy's telling me, we got aliens in the tunnel. And, as a scientist and engineer on a top secret base, you get to see technology developments or stories that are happening, and you go, wow, a lot of this stuff has the potential to be true because of just this little bit I know. So the curiosity is always there, and I read and I read and I read, and I think it was probably the Phoenix Lights, or there was some big wave that happened that just was a slam dunk for me, and I said, I've just got to get more serious about this and not just a casual thing. I want to make it a serious hobby, and reading everything I could get my hands on. And then I started to do, field investigations about 2008, where I actually went to Exeter, and that was such a great experience. I met people who were the witnesses. I met a guy who owned the dining farm, and the horses on the dining farm were heard kicking in the stalls by the two officers in Norman on the night that this incident happened, at the second time Norman saw it. And I asked the guy, what about the barn? He goes, the horses had totally destroyed the barn through the kicking. He goes, there's
wow.
no doubt about it. And I said, well, and now he had sold the property since, and now it's an equestrian center. I said, well, can we get in there? He goes, no. He goes, that barn's been torn down. So it would have been so cool to go in there and take a photograph and to see, look at, this is the barn that was destroyed and never repaired. But unfortunately, I was decades late. But having it firsthand from the guy whose records I have of owning that property, and I talked to the people who run that sort of thing for the state of Massachusetts, validating the records for me and giving me the records, showing me that the guy I interviewed had own that property. That was awesome. And that kind of got me started. Like, there's still evidence, there's still stories out there that haven't been told. There's still breadcrumbs that I can drop for people who come behind me and maybe find out more, maybe add to the story.
Sasha's
well,
question.
I've been fascinated by some of the stories that Michael Sulla has documented of Air Force guys that were ordered to fire upon a bogey and destroyed, and pilots that were excellent, Korean war pilots knew what they were doing, who their planes disintegrated unexpectedly, and it really looks like they were challenging alien craft. Are you familiar with any of that information?
Well, there's the Iranian incident. I think it was 1976, was it? And that's when we were friends with them still, and they had our airplanes. And the guy who eventually became a general, a very high officer, in fact, I think he was in charge of the Air Force later, tells the story quite openly how they were going to lock and load, and their entire panel shut down. They had nothing. They had no navigation. They had no flight controls. They had no weapons. And he talks about it. In fact, I think he did that James Fox thing where they brought all those people in Washington, D.C., and they recorded it. So, yeah, there's stories out there, first-person stories that they tried to fire on these craft, and it didn't turn out so well.
I'm curious about the 90-foot globe that came down. I saw a large globe when I was a young child, and what's his name? Greg Cameron talks about his first encounter was with a globe. Can you tell me a little bit? We're not talking about orbs, but we're talking about the large globes. What more do you know about these globes?
Well, what I discovered was in the Norman Muscarello case is he never called it a ship. He never called it a craft. Norman Muscarello always referred to it as that thing. And it was a similar response to the two police officers, Bertrand and Hunt, who were with Muscarello a couple of hours after his first sighting and were with him during a second sighting in that same location, where they couldn't make out a silvery, reflective kind of aluminum foil craft. It was just a blinding light that had form that they estimated to be somewhere around 90 feet.
And this was a nighttime visitation. This wasn't during the day.
Yeah, Norman was hitchhiking up the Kensington Road heading to Exeter. And I think, again, don't quote me, but it was after midnight. It was dark, and I've been out there, and I've had photos there on a similar night, and you can't see your hand in front of the face. In fact, I had a supernatural kind of encounter with a disembodied voice while I was sitting in my car just 100 feet from the original incident at Exeter site, and it's all in my book, which I won't get to now. But back to the orb, that's the way they described it. They didn't describe a silvery craft. They said it was just blinding light and 90 foot in width and kind of ball shaped, elliptical shape.
And this was in New Hampshire, Exeter.
Or
where is it?
In September of 1965, it was in Exeter, New Hampshire. And it's written by John Fuller, and his famous book is called Incident at Exeter. He also did the Interrupted Journey. He wrote the Interrupted Journey for Betty and Barney Hill.
Okay, so this correlates with my sightings. So this was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, East Coast, and in '65, I was 11 years old, and that's when I was seeing them. And
in
mine was
that's fascinating.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad that we're doing this because it's connecting the dots. Now, my orb, my giant globe, there were three of them at one point, and they had different colors, like a green, an orange, and a yellow. They were definitely not the moon, and there was a point when the three of them gathered together. What color was the globe? What color was the globe that they saw?
I believe that it was a bright whitish yellow, but in the middle, they described multicolor lights going in like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it was going right to left and left to right. And so they not only saw this globe, but they saw lights that were in the middle of it doing this very methodical sequence, which were, I think, red, blue. I'm not sure what the other colors were right now, but it's all described in perfect clarity in John Fuller's book, Incident at Exeter.
Okay, so you're an engineer. How do these crafts go? What makes them go? What's your guess?
Well, if I had to float a craft of that size, I would probably use nuclear power, because I know for a fact that countries, including the US and Russia, have nuclear powered vehicles. They have nuclear powered airplanes and submarines and spacecraft and missiles and those type of things that they can keep afloat forever. So, obviously I don't know what the alien technology would be 100 million years in the future, but it seems to me that nuclear power would be compact enough and usable enough and controllable enough and well understood enough to be used. And that's why in sightings you get radiation readings, and they're easily matched to a nuclear source.
Thank you.
So we have less than 10 minutes left. What would you like to focus on to tell our listeners about your research?
It's continuing. I'm hoping that somebody has some fabulous stories that they want to tell me, and I can value add to it or just record it. In fact, there's a guy by the name of Rob Mercer. He's a former MUFON star investigator. He lives in Springfield, Ohio, and he saw my talk a couple weeks ago in Fairborn, Ohio, which is right next to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He approached me later and said, "You've got to see what I have. It's a collection of materials that were carried out of FTD by a former member of the Blue Book Project." And indeed, he has boxes of material that a former captain took with him when he retired.
Oh my.
And I got indication of what type of things he took out?
Everything. It has the guy's job description. It has a Rolodex of names of people that the Air Force was consulting with. It has a list of people that the Air Force was observing who were in the field, many of the NICAP members. There are some intriguing things in there, and Rob and I are putting our heads together because as an insider, I understand what it is he has. And Rob doesn't quite know what he has. So I think there's some information, and none of it's classified, obviously. But I'll give you an example. We'll close on something that I think is really intriguing.
Okay.
The Air Force wants to claim that Blue Book was an investigative effort. Well, there are no facts to support that. All the facts tell us they were there to interpret the results that were collected by themselves and somebody else and explain them away. And if you look at the job description of the person who owned the files, he was a physicist. He was in the Air Force. And when you read his job description, what the job description says is to explain the reports. It doesn't say investigate the reports and tell the truth. It says explain the reports. So knowing what we know about Project Blue Book, it's clear that the staff was not engaged to try to find out what the truth was. Rather, they were there to explain it. And this job description is evidence that not only, was their job product part of the history, but the job description says, hey, you're not an investigator, you're an explainer. And I think this is some of the things that we can kind of squeeze out of the files that he has. And I went through them. Most of them have declassification dates on them and they're scratched out. Most were like confidential and now they're, public domain kind of things. You could release them. but they're very interesting. And that's the kind of thing that's been coming forward. People have said, hey, I got this stuff, maybe you can tell me what it is, and maybe we can come up with some new angles on this information.
Wow, that's like Citizen Smith in 1984 writing history the way it's supposed to be written in propaganda terms.
Right. I wanted to go back to Wright-Patterson. So you're talking about Project Blue Book. Tell us a little bit, what was Project Sign and Project Grudge?
Those were the precursors to Blue Book. 1947, they said, hey, this is a real problem. There was a letter written called the Estimate of the Situation. It went up to General Vandenberg, who was in charge of the military back then, maybe just the Air Force, Chief of Staff. And he said, I don't accept this, but I do think we still need a project to look into it and record all the sightings and try to derive, what's going on, because he would not accept the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So they went back to the drawing board, and Sign and Grudge were two of the efforts that predated Project Blue Book. They were rather short-lived. I think, Sign was a couple years, and then Blue Book went for a couple of years, and then in 1952 it became Sign was a couple of years, Grudge was a couple of years, then those things morphed into Project Blue Book in 1952. So they were just precursors.
Any reason behind the name Blue Book?
Probably because it was Air Force. They wore blue uniforms.
Okay.
Yeah. Occam's razor, the simplest explanation, is probably the one that fits.
Did you have a question, Sasha? Okay, I have a question. So where are you going next with this information, with your investigations? You're talking about another book. Tell us about that. What's going to happen here?
Well, I think in closing, I'll get back to that question. One of the things I'd like to announce is I am actually going to be one of the vendors at the Air Force Marathon Expo in Fairborn, Ohio, on the 15th and 16th of September. And
the Air Force Marathon Expo. So you're going to have your books, and what else?
I'm going to have my books there. And I'm actually going to cut a deal because I want to. I was friends of the Air Force Marathon for years, for about photographer for the Air Force Marathon, and I'm one of their VIP runners this year because of my service to the marathon. So I'm going to be selling my books there. I'll be autographing them, and for the first 50 customers who buy my book, I'm going to give them a copy free of a legendary book called Injury Free Running that was put out by the experts of Runner's World. So it's a 2-for-1 deal. It's a great deal. I'm trying to pull the runners in, and if you buy my book, you're going to get a free copy of a very famous running book, which of course I won't autograph because it's not my book. But I just wanted to put that out to everybody and let them know I'll be there most day Thursday, most day Friday, and I'm running the race on Saturday. So you better catch me on Thursday or Friday, the 15th or 16th of September in Fairborn, Ohio. It's at the Nutter Center.
Were there any super soldiers that you've raced against that had unfair advantages because they'd been enhanced and they got such times that it was unbelievable?
No, but I'll tell you, if you look up my name and you look up the results, I usually beat 75% of the younger runners.
Oh, good.
So I do not care what my time is. I just wanted to know who finished looking at my backside.
That's great. So this is an Air Force thing. So they're going to have a UFO book at the Air Force Marathon.
Yes,
correct?
and I know this is a mind bender, and I'm only there because I've been friends with the Air Force Marathon and I've supported them, and I've been their photographer for years. And they said, look, this is not normal, but in fact, there's a story, and I'll try to get to it quickly. There's a story of how Paul Davids, who did Roswell, was going to bring his 4-foot. You know Paul Davids. Well, Paul was he's one of my endorsers. He was going to bring the animatronic alien from the movie Roswell and put it at the Air Force Marathon Expo as a photo op. But,
oh, cool.
But the Secretary of the Air Force Public Affairs Office shot it down.
And that's the end of our show. Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you, Thomas Becker. Thank you, listeners. Love and blessings and aloha.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern in Studio A. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.